Welcome back, everyone. This will be the before start flow in the PC-12. If you didn't check out the receiving flow video, we would have done that first. I'll link to that here so you can check it out. That's the first video in this playlist. So the before start flow is done as soon as the passengers and the bags are loaded in, the chocks are pulled, the doors are closed, and we're ready to start the engine up and get going. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that my seatbelt's fastened, my shoulder harnesses are on. I'm going to adjust my rudder pedals down here with this hand crank to make sure that they're where I want them. And then come over here to my EIS. That's this box right here. That's the engine indicating system that has all of our engine instruments on it. And I'm going to check with this test button the 8s and tapes. So if I press that, you'll see all the 8s light up and all the tapes range to full. And I'm just checking all the LCD segments to make sure nothing's burned out. So that looked good. And then I'm going to press this fuel reset button right here. And in the real airplane, you have to hold this down for 2 or 3 seconds. In the sim, it's just a quick push. And that will reset the fuel totalizer. So it'll take a new snapshot or sensor reading of the left and the right tanks right here and update our quantity. So this is showing the fuel level in the left and the right tanks, also the total quantity with both tanks combined right here in pounds, 1,360 pounds. And then this will also reset our fuel used in pounds right here to 0. So I'm just updating the reading, and I want to check 2 things. One, that I have enough fuel on board for the flight. Based on my flight planning, I would know how much fuel I needed plus reserve. So I'm making sure I have sufficient fuel on board right here. And then I also want to check the fuel balance. So we don't want to take off in the PC-12 with more than 3 of these LCD segments of disparity between the 2 tanks. If we have a greater fuel imbalance than that, our lateral CG would not be such that we would want to take off. So in that case, we would just add fuel to the low tank to even them up. So these are nice and even. We've got 1,360 pounds on board. We'll just pretend that that's enough for our flight today. The fuel used is at 0 since the engine isn't running. That all looks good. And then I'm going to check my cause down here to make sure that we don't have any door open lights. Those would be warning lights, which means they would be red. So no red lights, no door open lights. We're good on that. And then I'm going to turn around back here, and for whatever reason, Coronado did not model the oxygen mask in here, so you'll have to take my word for this, but in the real airplane there's an oxygen mask right here on this wall. And on the bottom of that mask there's a red button that says test, and I would press that button and hear a hiss of oxygen come out of the mask, and that's just letting me know the mask has good pressure and there is oxygen running to it. And then I'm going to scroll down here, and you can't see it, but behind this seat there is a switch called the passenger oxygen switch, and it has 3 settings: off, auto, and on. And I want to make sure that switch is in auto. And that switch controls the passenger oxygen masks in the back. We want it in auto so that if we do lose pressurization in flight, that decompression will automatically trigger those masks to turn on. So oxygen will start flowing to those masks in the back automatically without me having to flip that switch, and those masks in the back are continuous flow. And then once that's done, we're going to come up here and check our battery voltage. And again, we want to make sure that the batteries for start are at least 24 volts, and as you can see here we only have 23.9 because I've been horsing around in the sim a little bit. I've also noticed that the draw on the batteries in the sim is unrealistically fast. The batteries don't really wear down this fast in real life. So in this case, we would not actually want to start the engine since we have less than 24 volts, but since the sim isn't modeled correctly in here, we're just going to pretend like that says at least 24 volts so we can start the engine up. But just a quick note on this, with lead acid batteries, keep in mind that even a 1/10 of a discharge on the battery is significant. So this isn't like your iPhone battery where, 24 volts is 100% and 12 volts is 50%. If you get down to 23.7 or 23.6 volts, that is a significant discharge on the battery. So a little goes a long way in terms of the reading here for discharge. So again, we'll just pretend that these say 24 volts or more for the start. And then I would turn on my beacon to let anybody outside the airplane know we're about to turn the prop and start the engine up. And then I would clear the area around the airplane, make sure we're not going to have any fatalities on the ramp today. We don't want anyone near that prop at all. So we do have a marshal out there in the sim today. I'm just going to clear left, forward, and right. He's far enough away. Ordinarily, this truck probably wouldn't really be in front of the airplane like that, but it's far enough away we're not going to hurt anything. And when I'm ready to start the engine, I would stick my hand up in the windshield and spin my finger around, and that would let the marshal know that I'm ready to start the engine. And if it looked clear around the propeller area to him, he would point at me and spin his finger around back to let me know that I'm cleared to start. And then I would come up here and press and hold the starter button for at least 2 seconds to engage the starter. So I'm going to do that in a second, but I'm just going to talk you through the start sequence first because it happens too fast for me to talk while it's actually happening. So as soon as I engage the starter, I'm checking for several things. First thing I want to see is oil pressure rising right here. Doesn't have to be in the green range, it just has to be alive. We don't want to turn the engine without oil circulating, obviously. We could damage it pretty quickly. So we just want to make sure the oil is rising, oil pressure that is rising. The second thing is I want to look up here at my ITT to make sure that it's below 150 for start before I light it off, which means introduce fuel. So today this is a cold start, so you can see the ITT is at 20 degrees because the engine has not been running, so we're well below 150 obviously today. But on a quick turn, if we had just been running the engine for a while, this might be above 150, in which case we would need to motor that temperature down before we introduced fuel. So I do have a separate video about the start sequence on the PC-12 that I'll link to here if you want to check that out, and that video is just completely devoted to starting the engine. The next thing we want to check for out here is that the propeller is turning, and that just lets me know that I didn't forget to take off the prop anchors and that propeller is turning freely. And then as soon as we get here to 13% NG minimum, I can light off the engine by moving the condition lever down here into ground idle. Now ideally we want to let the engine actually motor up a little bit higher than 13%. Typically it will top out between 18 and 20% NG. And the higher we can get that RPM before we introduce fuel, the cooler the start. So it's better on the engine to wait till the NG is a little bit higher than the minimum. So as soon as we get maximum RPM out of the starter, we'll go ahead and introduce fuel down here with the condition lever, move that into ground idle. And then I'm checking first for my fuel flow right here to make sure that's normal. Fuel flow is the first indication of a hot start. So I want to make sure this says 80 or 90 pounds per hour in the real airplane. In the sim, I think it's closer to like 130 or 40, something like that. It's a little bit higher than it is in real life. And then I'm checking to make sure that the ITT is not rising faster than normal. So we don't want to see this skyrocketing up. Again, that's a sign of a hot start, and we would want to take the condition lever all the way back to feather cutoff immediately so we didn't torch the engine. And then I'm also checking that the NG is rising steadily as well. So I'm checking for a hot start here on the ITT and a hung start here on the NG. And then as soon as the NG gets up to 50%, the starter will cut out automatically. The ITT will stabilize, and then the NG should stabilize right around 63% in the real airplane. I think it's like 61 or 62% in the sim here. And then we have a good start. All right, so without further ado, let's do it. So the beacon's on. Again, we'll clear left, forward, and right. Spin the finger around. Cleared to start. And then I'm going to press the starter button down. Again, in the real airplane, I would hold that for at least 2 seconds. Oil pressure is rising. ITT below 150. NG is rising. Prop is turning. It's topping out about 17, 18%. Going to come down here, introduce fuel. Ground idle. And then I'm checking fuel flow. Yeah, 157. ITT is rising normally. NG is rising. Normal rates. So again, checking for hot start here, hung start here. 50%. Make sure the starter cuts out. It did. The ITT would not normally go quite this high in the real airplane. Now it's stable, and the NG is stable, 62.1%, 62 right there. So that is a good start, and you can see the oil pressure is now in the green, the temperature's coming up. We've got torque, the propeller RPM will come up to about 1700 RPM, and we've got a good start. So at this point I would come up and do my after start flow. And don't forget as well, I didn't mention before, but before I actually started the engine, I would run through my paper before start checklist just to make sure I didn't miss anything in the flow. So tune in next time, guys. I'll run through the after start flow and checklist, and the before taxi flow as well. That's normally combined into one. And then we'll taxi out and take off and go from there. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Leave me your questions in the comments as always, and I'll see you on the next video.